we put for you a collection of 6 beers together that are deeply missed today. One beer brand on this list is supposed to have invented the six-pack. Not every beer on this list just went bankrupt, and some reasons might shock you. Falstaff. The first beer dates back to 1838, so it has a legacy behind its belt, and the chances are that your father or grandfather already drank this one. At one point in the 1960s, it was one of the largest beer brands in the whole US, and was always present at every barbecue with family or friends. But one unfortunate thing about the beer is that its peak was already 60 years ago, and it never regained its former shine and glory. I'm talking about Falstaff. The beer brand chose a Shakespearean character for the brand, and nearly every beer enthusiast saw that at least once or twice in their lifetime. The story of Falstaff has roots as old as the history of brewing in St. Louis. It was first introduced by the Lemp Brewery. Falstaff beer was just one out of many other brands offered by the large brewery. But something about the beer was different. It was marketed for and loved by blue-collar workers. Also, it had a different approach to marketing campaigns, which mostly were very funny to the people and had catchy jingles. But the brand, unfortunately, has a dark history around it. Some people even call it cursed. In 1920, William J. Lemp Jr. sold the Falstaff brand to a friend of his called Joe Griesedick. Nothing wrong with that so far. Unfortunately, it was one of the last business decisions he would ever take. Prohibition hit very hard and business was tough. So, Joe Griesedick decided to end his own life just 2 years later after making one of the biggest decisions to buy the brand. 13 years of alcohol prohibition was the hardest time for all the breweries, and unfortunately, the end for most of the private ones that are not owned by large corporates. After prohibition, the Griesedick family tried their last shot and expanded aggressively. Their strategy was simple: buy defunct breweries around St. Louis and the nation and get them back to work. But this strategy was doomed to fail, and it ultimately got discontinued because of financial struggles and changing taste over the years. The next one on our list is supposed to have invented the six-pack we all buy and love, even to this date, no matter which brand you prefer. Jack's Beer. It got popular in the first place because of the smooth taste with a hint of southern charm, and it had a neon sign lit up the city. Some of you may already have a good feeling about which one it could be. The brand was first brewed in 1913, but they shared the name with another company in New Orleans that also sold beer under the same name. So they went to court and later settled to split territories. The end of this brand was, of course, brought to you by the one and only conglomerate of beer brands, aka Pabst Brewing Companies. If you watched our first part of this video series, link top right, then they are nothing new to you, and the Jack's Beer is also a victim of them. But how did they get popular in the first place, and why did they have to go? Like I said in the beginning, people loved the smooth taste, and it got good marketing campaigns very early on. Jack's is also supposed to be the inventor of the beloved six-pack. On top of that, in 1948, Jack's became one of the first products to be marketed on television specifically for a black audience. History was being made with this beer brand, and it was not only the unique flavor of the beer itself. 8 years later after the ad campaign, Jack's Brewing closed and gave the Jack's copyright to Jackson Brewing. So they did not have to split territories anymore. The good times went on year by year, and the Jack's Beer had a great fan base. But 18 years later, after they got the copyright fully for themselves for Jack's, things went downhill very quickly. They had to shut down and sell the Jack's formula to Pearl Brewing in San Antonio. Pearl continued to produce Jack's for a while, but they ended up buying Pabst Brewing in 1985. After that, many brands were discontinued, including Jack's. Jack's vanished from shelves in the 80s, and that's sad. But things like the six-pack or being one of the first TV commercials to advertise for people of color is something that will always be in the books of history, no matter what. Drewries. Speaking of history, the next beer on our list has a history dating back to a time when times were simpler, but only sometimes better. 1875, Edward Lancaster Drury went to Winnipeg, and he liked it so much and got a lot of inspiration out of his trip that he decided to relocate his whole family from St. Paul, Minnesota to Canada. There, he became a legend for the people, and even got his own statue after his death. But that was not only because of his knowledge of how to brew an amazing beer. He was also very politically involved and changed a lot for the better in Winnipeg. But what happened with his beer and why was it discontinued? The beer was introduced by breweries with a heavy buy local mentality, and that worked perfectly and rose to fame across Western Canada. After being established in Canada, they expanded to the USA, and they were acquired later on. The ownership changes over time impacted the company like you already expected. For the worse. Again, it's a case of corporate conglomerates destroying our local beloved beer brands. The original Winnipeg brewery closed in 1940, but the final production globally were finally ceased in 1997. Drewry's was a hidden gem in the North American history of beer brewing, but eventually faded into history. The next beer on our list is probably the beer with the strongest and unique character to it. Not only is the flavor very unique, but it also has European roots that were perfectly mixed with the American mentality. Michelob Dark. I'm talking about a beer that had a rich flavor and the recipe dates back to the 1930s. European dark lager beer, the Michelob Dark. It was introduced by Anheuser-Busch as part of the Michelob lineup in 1995. The beer became so popular not only because of its flavor and uniqueness, but also because it was a premium choice for beer lovers with a guilty pleasure for a dark lager. The only problem that this brand had to face was not the shift in ownership, but time. The ultimate killer for this awesome brand was simply time. People's taste for beers and in general change over time. Especially between 2007 and 2012, the sales crashed heavily because consumers wanted more lighter beers and different exotic flavors. The beer brand could have adopted it, but they decided not to, and I think it was the only right choice. Because Michelob Dark was known to be a strong beer with character, and bringing out fruity light beers in the early 2010s would not fit at all. So, it's gone for good. Meisterbrau. Chicago locals will immediately know which beer is missing. It was a popular local brew at the beginning of the 20th century, and people considered the beer ahead of its time. But being the first is not always the best to stay in the market. I'm talking about the Meisterbrau. It got so many successful marketing campaigns, and they peaked with 1 million barrels annually in the 60s. But the business slowed down in the 70s. Miller Lite was one of the big reasons for it. It simply stole the show. On top of it, the reasons are straightforward. Mismanagement, debt, and ownership changes. The usual 3 fundamental pillars for the tremendous downfall of a brand we once loved. Bud Dry. The final beer on our list is special. It's not a whole beer company that went down, but a brand itself. It was an alternative to regular Budweiser and got very popular in the 80s and 90s. They had a clever marketing campaign. Why ask why? And if you drank it before, you already know, Bud Dry. It was a great alternative to regular Budweiser, and it was something new. That was the main reason for the rise of popularity, but it was not smooth sailing, even for Budweiser. They took a big risk to create this brew. Combining light lagers with new unique flavors that the company never tried before was a ballsy move, but it played out perfectly for them. But after a few years, the 90s trend faded and it lost relevance. It quietly exited the scene and was a one-time thing for a few years. Bud Ice was the new hit from there. If you think we missed a brand and you also already watched our first part of the series, top right, then make sure to comment it down below and we would love to make another video.